There we go. Is that all up on your screen there? Oh, good. Thanks, Brian. Excellent. All right. Okay. So, welcome back to Module 3 for profit planning. And so today we're going to be talking about more about wealth generating expenses and a little bit about debt management. I was asked to speak about debt management, so towards the end of today's module, we'll be covering a bit of managing our debt. And just to start with a bit of revision, didn't have a module last week because I was away, so it's been a couple of weeks, so it's just worth revising where we got to from the first couple of sessions. And a great place to start is just to remind you that if we fail to plan, we are in effect planning to fail. So that's what this whole series of modules on profit planning is all about, is about the importance of planning for our financial future. Right. And holistic profit planning revolves around this very simple idea that our income, we have a set income or an expected income from our business. We have some sort of an idea of what we want from our profit. So we subtract the profit that we want to make or the surplus we want to make from our income. And then what's left over is our expenses. And this is sort of the differentiating sort of idea from sort of traditional sort of financial management and profit planning. In profit planning, we do plan our profit first. Okay, in module 1, we spoke a little bit about ways to generate our income, potentially through brainstorming and other ways to be creative to increase our income. And then in our second module, we focused a little bit about some of our expenses and the types of expenses and how we might classify our expenses going forward. And today we're going to get a bit more into that in a bit more detail. And it's really important to remember that we won't get rich or we won't be profitable just by saving money. I think it's really important. And I know that Ben likes this one as well. We need to focus both on our income and our expenses, which is why we've focused on the income in module 1 and the expenses in modules 2 and again today. So we plan our profit first before we plan anything else. So in this little diagram here, we have a sort of fixed income or a planned income for the financial year. And then we want to sort of visualize what sort of a profit or a surplus that we want to make from that estimated income. And then using the formula income minus profit, that's what our expenses is. And we do this because it automatically puts a cap or we put a limit on our expenses. And that's shown this sort of diagram here, where you have a region where we've got a set profit, and then this is what's left over for our income, for our expenses from our income. And so the real question comes down to, which we spoke about in the last module, is exactly how much profit you want to make. And you determine this from your holistic context. How much profit do you want to make? Alan Savory in holistic management, he says the place to start is with a 50% profit. So half of all your income goes towards profit. Now that may not be realistic and it may not fit in with your holistic context. For example, if you wanted to go on an extensive overseas holiday every year, you may not be able to aim for a 50% profit from your income. But that's a really important question, is how much profit or surplus that you actually want to make from your income. Because that very much determines how you cut expenses, as we'll go through a bit more detail today. So we have a certain amount of income, and we'll have, based on our thinking for how much profit we want, we're going to have a set of expenses from our business. If we start as a point to aim for a 50% planned profit or surplus, our goal now is to classify all of our expenses, and we want to classify them from what we deem to be the most important through to the least important. And the reason that we want to do that is if we need to remove our expenses or cut some expenses to make sure we reach our planned profit, we want to be removing the least important expenses first, and the most important expenses that are going to help our business, we want to remove those ones last. And obviously, we keep removing expenses until we can actually plan to achieve our surplus that we want, which we can then use for land planning purposes, asset purchase, or a holiday or whatever. So just to remind you all, we need to start the process well in advance of the start of the financial year. The financial profit planning can take some time, so it's important we start nice and early to give ourselves plenty of time to get that done. If it's the first time we're doing a plan, we may need additional support. We may need someone to help us to prepare our plan if it's the first time. Having a friend or a colleague could be really important, or a coach or someone else. Some key steps in the process. We want to be, as I already touched on, we want to be classifying our expenses from the most to the least important. And we'll get more into that today. And we need to be addressing any crucial elements that can impede our business. So in our last session, we started the idea of classification or classifying our expenses. We have our wealth generating expenses. These are any expense that is expected to generate any new or additional income for an enterprise, and any expense that does that is considered a wealth generating expense. We have an inescapable expense. These are any expenses that we are legally or morally obligated to pay. And because we are obligated to pay them, we want to be planning for them upfront in our plan. We have to pay them anyway, so we might as well plan for them upfront in our plan. And then we have our maintenance expenses. And these are pretty much any other expense that we need to run our business. And most of our expenses will fall into the class of maintenance expenses. We need most of them. We probably can't get rid of a lot of them, but we can look to reduce our costs where possible. And we spoke about the inescapable and maintenance expenses in the last module, and today we're going to spend more time focusing on the wealth generating expenses. The first of which is the log jams. Okay, so this is a major element from the profit planning process. So what is a log jam? And this is just a photograph that I grabbed off the internet describing what a log jam can look like. This. So when in big logging areas, they used to chop down all the logs, and they used to roll them into these rivers, and they would float downstream. And occasionally logs would get jammed up and they would cease to flow. And you can see here, there's actually a bunch of people in this photograph, and this little circle down here, that's a guy that who's standing on those logs down there, and I've just circled him there just to give you an idea of the scale of the size of the log jam. So in a log jam, it's often that there's one log that stops everything from moving. And so the way they used to try and unblock these log jams, they used to climb up onto hills or get an aerial view as much as possible and look down and try to work out which log was the one that was getting stuck and blocking everything else. And the idea was that if you could remove that one log, you could unblock that log jam, and then everything will start to move. And so Alan Savory, he's adapted this sort of idea into the profit planning process. And he says that there may be a log jam in our business. So one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves is there a log jam in our business? And sometimes because we're quite close to our own business, we might need some outside help to identify a potential log jam. Narissa, is that a question? I've seen your hand up. Is that a question? No?
Sorry, no, I was just resting in the...
Okay, yeah, that's okay. I saw your arm go up, that's all. Okay. Yeah, so is there a log jam in your business? And log jams can come in many different types and flavors. And so here's a couple of examples. There might be some specific lack of knowledge or training that blocks everything from moving. Could be some government regulation, a piece of legislation that is impeding the business. Could be a lack of water. Could be the loss of an abattoir or some sort of transport cost. We visited a farmer last week actually, and he has recently moved out of the mining sector, and he's bought a farm a few years ago, and he's gone through the process of attaining. He's a cattle farmer, and he wanted to be an organic cattle farmer, and he has just got his organic certification literally in the last few months. And the only organic certified abattoir has closed near him. So now he's completely lost his abattoir, and he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do now. And it's a major impediment to his business. In our experience, I think a big one, working with farmers and farming couples, a major logjam is when the two partners are not on the same page. They're not communicating well together. So logjams can come in many different types. Until the logjam has been addressed, nothing moves. And that's a really important point from our business. We've got to do something to address the logjam. So in our planning process, we need to plan what steps we're going to take to address the logjam, and then we record those expenses in our plan. Any expense that addresses a logjam is considered a wealth generating expense. Any questions on that? Okay. The next type of wealth generating expenses are what we refer to as weak link expenses. So the weak link, in every enterprise, there is a weak link in the chain of production. So to grow our business and to sustain a profit each year, we need to ensure that our biggest investment in money or our time and labor strengthens the weakest link. If we always put our investment into strengthening the weakest link in our chain of production, we will strengthen our business. Strengthening the weakest link strengthens the chain of production. So like with the logjam, we need to plan what steps we'll take to address the weak link, and then we record those in a worksheet in our financial plan. So what does this look like? So what is the chain of production? So the chain of production is, quite simply, we have some sort of resource conversion, okay, where we convert sunlight or raw resources, including money and creativity. We're converting some sort of resource into something. So it could be, for example, we're converting sunlight into grass, which we could then use to graze livestock. The next link in the chain is product conversion, where we take these resources that have been converted and we then turn them into some sort of a product, which we can then sell to a market. And so the final step in the chain is marketing. All right. So we're finding some way to market or to sell our products or services. So suppose we had a cattle livestock associated with a meat enterprise. The resource conversion, as I've already mentioned, could be converting sunlight into growing grass, which we then use to feed our cattle. And then the product conversion side of it, we take that meat that we've grown, and we convert them into, say, for example, let's say we're selling salamis and sausages, which we then want to sell to the market. And so the marketing aspect of the chain of production might be setting up some sort of an online business where we can sell our salamis and other meat products to the market. So very simply, the weak link, there's always going to be one link, either resource conversion, product conversion, or marketing conversion, that's the weakest in that chain of production. And recognizing or identifying which is our weakest link at any one time and putting our investment into that specific weak link strengthens the overall chain. So for example, investing in fences or irrigation won't increase our overall profitability in our business if the marketing is the weak link. So investing down here to grow more grass for feeding our cattle by using more fences or irrigation, that won't help improve our overall business if the marketing side of our chain of production is actually the weakest link. And we have some former clients who have quite a successful pasture chicken enterprise. So they have a whole bunch of chicken tractors on their property, and they've built quite a successful business. And I think it was about 4 or 5 months ago, they were approached by a couple of filmmakers and they were asked did they want to be a part of a documentary on regenerative agriculture or regenerative farming. And they were told that if they wanted to partake, that was going to cost them $5,000 to participate in this documentary film. And where do you think this fits into the chain of production? Any ideas?
Would it be marketing?
Yeah, absolutely. It was marketing. All right. Totally. A film being a part of it, it's all going to be a part of a marketing strategy. It turns out, though, their enterprise is actually quite successful, but their weak link is not marketing. It's actually the product conversion. They've got plenty of grass. What's limiting is they can't produce enough chickens to meet the demand they've already got for their product. So the product conversion was their weak link. So to spend their $5,000 effectively as part of a marketing campaign wasn't going to improve their bottom line in their business. That'd have been, what they have decided to do is to invest that money instead into the product conversion in their chain of production, and they've decided to invest in more chicken tractors for their business. So just being aware of this very simple chain of production, resource conversion, product conversion, or marketing conversion can really help you identify where to put your investment for the upcoming financial year. So like any expense to address a logjam, any weak link expense is also considered to be a wealth generating expense. And any other expense that is expected to generate any additional or new income for an enterprise is also considered to be a wealth generating expense. So some examples of other types of wealth generating expenses could be a range of things. Could be a new office, could be a new computer, could be a printer, some new software, could be more livestock, could be more water tanks or more irrigation or fences for your pastures. Could be a new car or truck, a shed, a cold or a cool room for storage. Could be seed, feed, or some other biostimulant to put out on your product. So any number of these expenses could be considered to be a wealth generating expense. Okay, any questions on any of that before I move on to the next bit? Oh, good. Right. The next group of expenses is what we refer to as adverse factors. So an adverse factor is any sort of factor that can adversely affect the business as a whole. Adverse factors reduce the overall efficiency or productivity of the business, but they aren't necessarily essential. They're not as urgent as a logjam or weak link expense, but they still may be important in your business. So for example, a new computer or a software. So for example, you could maintain all your finances using an Excel spreadsheet, or you may choose to spend the money on taking out a Xero subscription as a finance managing a package. And this is one that I've grappled with a fair bit because I manage all our finances using Excel spreadsheets. And it's clear that going to some sort of package like Xero may improve my efficiency, but the cost, I'm still weighing up, is the cost worth it? And for the moment, I'm still happy to continue doing it through Excel rather than forking out the money. And you might have other sort of examples in your own business. It could be some sort of a lack of expertise, which may require some sort of training. Maybe some poor communication skills, maybe some training in communication. You might need a vacation, or it could be the lack of a capital to launch some sort of a new enterprise. So any of these sort of factors could be considered an adverse factor. If we actually spent the money to address these things, it might improve our overall efficiency or productivity, but we could do without them if we absolutely had to. And I think one of the points that I wanted to make is that you would have noticed is that a lot of these expenses could be considered either an adverse factor expense or they could be considered a wealth generating expense. In the end, it really comes down to how you are going to classify those expenses. It's somewhat of an arbitrary decision, and it's up to you, and importantly, up to you, your holistic context. What is it you want? So, going back to the example, looking at the recording the finances and the expenses, say using an Excel spreadsheet versus spending money on a accounting package like Xero. It takes more time to use Excel. How much more time versus the cost of paying for a subscription? That's in the end going to be a personal decision for yourself and what's important to you in your holistic context. You may say, my time is the most precious thing, and therefore I want to spend money to save as much time as possible to free up my time to do whatever other things I want to do. Or you might say, oh, I've got a bit of spare time. I don't mind spending a bit more time doing my finances using just a regular Excel spreadsheet. So the classification really is up to you and how you classify it. If you consider the expense, if you consider it to be more important, you might end up classifying it more as a wealth generating expense. If you consider it to be less important expense, you might classify it more as an adverse factor. And I always think of like an annual holiday. This is one that we've grappled with personally as well. When you haven't had a holiday for a long time, you start saying, well, how important is it to take a holiday, take a vacation? Because we can always say, oh, I don't really need a holiday, I can sort of push on without it. But having a good holiday and refreshing from a very relaxing holiday could really be a massive boost to your business. In the end, it comes down to how you choose to classify these expenses. And I've just used the holiday as a good example of that. So we have our income and we have our expenses. And what we're doing is we've now gone through the process of classifying all of our expenses, and we put them into one of these various categories. We put them into the logjam category, the inescapables, the weak links, other wealth generating expenses, maintenance expenses, and possibly adverse factors. The ones on the left-hand side here, these are the more important ones, and we don't want to be cutting these ones. If all we had the money for was to invest in our business, we address either a logjam or our weak link, we would always continue to improve our business. So the ones on the left-hand side here, these are the ones that we don't want to be cutting. On the right-hand side, these are the less important ones, and we will cut these expenses if we need to. Remember, we're aiming to have some sort of a profit that we plan for from our estimated income. So the first things, based on how we've classified our expenses, the first ones we might get rid of might be any expense that addresses an adverse factor. These are the ones that will affect our efficiency and productivity, but are not really essential. So you say we might cut those ones first. We need our maintenance expenses, but we certainly can look to reduce them. And if we need to, we might have to cut them second. And then any other wealth generating expense, we want to be spending money to generate wealth for our business. So we want to keep those as much as possible. So we might end up cutting those if we need to as well. And the idea is that we just keep going back through our list of expenses, and we just keep cutting and cutting and cutting until we can get to that planned profit of whatever percentage we've aimed for. Okay, whether it's 50%, 10%, I don't really care myself. But the important point is that you definitely want to be maintaining some form of a profit and planning for that surplus every year. Does anybody have any questions on any of this?
Yes, I have, Bernard.
Yes, Paul, go for it.
As producers, we're governed really by we're price takers.
Yep.
So as a wool grower and meat producer, I don't get much say in the income side of it.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it goes up and down. So that's my weakest link probably is the sales side of things.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that's not a great place to be. I mean, one of the things is this is where I guess your creativity comes into play a bit here, Paul. What else potentially could you be doing from your land and your enterprise? Could you be doing something else that provides more regular income, so you're not totally at the effect of the market fluctuations? Paul?
Well, yeah, well, I do other things, but
Yep.
it's only with like wool classing and sheep classing and things like this. But
Mm-hmm.
that's all every now and again, not a regular income. So
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I mean, what I'm hearing is that your wool is a big part of your income, and the challenge is how can you diversify your incomes? What other things could you be doing? It may not be possible for you. I've got friends who farm and they do Airbnb on their properties, for example. So they're getting more into agritourism. I don't know if that's something that you would ever consider wanting to do. But when you've got more sources of income, you're at less of risk of those sort of fluctuations in the market. Any other thoughts on that one from anybody? Helping Paul out?
I always use the example of the gumboot manufacturer, Bernard. So, every second year when it's a drought, the income collapses again.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think the point that you made is every cent you spend is your choice. So this is new make.
Yeah.
Whereas as Paul's saying, the income's someone else's choice. So in terms
Yep.
of planning, that's what planning is about. It's putting our choices in a format to create a plan.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other thing as well is when we're planning, Paul, you really want to be planning for, we can hope for the best case scenarios, but maybe we need to be planning for more the worst case scenarios, and we sort of plan our expenses around what are sort of more of the worst case scenarios. And therefore, if the income comes in a bit higher than we expect, we're going to be in a much better situation. There's no point planning, to limit our expenses if we're expecting, for example, $500,000 of income, and it turns out to be only $100,000 this year, because we're going to be in a lot of trouble, for example. So diversifying our income, more enterprises could be a solution. Planning for the worst case scenarios. These are things that you can do. Paul, have you ever thought about doing other things or generating other enterprises, like getting into agritourism, for example? I'm not saying you should be doing that, but have you ever considered other things like that?
yeah, I was a stud stock carrier for 25 years, and I retired from that because drought and whatever. So, but
Okay.
Can you find a direct buyer for the wool? Is that an option?
I am sort of semi working on that one, but volume is the problem. They all want tons and tons of wool rather than just hundreds of kilos or a couple of ton.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I appreciate the predicament. We met a farmer. He's a sheep farmer over here in WA, and I think he's an organic sheep farmer, but I don't think he's a certified organic sheep farmer. But he's found a direct market overseas. His daughter is a very good sort of fashion designer, and she was able to connect her father to someone who in the fashion industry who loved the wool that he was producing, and so he was able to, like, taking Narissa's suggestion, and, directly selling it overseas to a market. yeah, it's challenging, and I don't think there's any easy solution, but looking for ways to diversify and create new markets is probably is certainly an option for you anyway. Any other questions at all before we move on to debt management? Okay. All right. All right. So I was asked to speak a little bit about debt management as well. So a useful way for us to manage our debt is by using what's known as the debt management ratio. And the debt management ratio is calculated the following way. We take our debt, or the amount we owe, and we divide it by the monthly payment, and that gives us some sort of form. That gives us a number which we express as a ratio relative to 1. So the lower the ratio, the faster that we can pay off the debt, and then lower our number of the inescapable expenses. Remember from module 2, we said the inescapable expenses are the ones we just have to pay. And the fewer of these that we've got, the better, because we've got more. The fewer inescapable choices that we have, the more choice we have where we can spend our money. We don't get that choice if a lot of our expenses are tied up in inescapable expenses. So how can we get our debt down? So suppose we have a property loan worth $250,000 in total, and we're paying off $450 a month to pay off that loan, which in today's interest rates is probably a little bit low. You probably could put a 1 in front of that, and it's probably getting a bit more realistic in today's sort of value. You've got a car loan that's worth $30,000 and you're paying that off at the rate of $550 a month. And you also have a credit card with a debt on it of about $8,000, and you're paying that off at the rate of $300 a month. So to pay off the debt, we need to calculate the debt management ratios. So the property loan is $250,000 divided by 450. That gives us a debt ratio of 555 to 1. The car, we take a $30,000 loan, divide by 550 in the repayments, and it comes out to a ratio of 55 to 1. And the last one is the credit card. We divide $8,000 by $300 of monthly repayment, and that gives us a ratio of 27 to 1. So the total payments is $1,300 every month across those 3 loans. So we want to try and get our debt down. So how do we do that? So suppose instead of paying, we had a bit of extra money from our, let's say we had a bit more income coming in, and we wanted to pay back an extra 10% every month towards our loans. So instead of putting in just the $1,300, we were putting in $1,430 across the 3 loans. So the question is, to which loan do we pay the extra $130 to? The answer is the loan with the lowest debt ratio. So the credit card has a ratio of 27 to 1. That's by far the lowest ratio. So that's the one we're going to pay first. The car has a second lowest ratio. That's one we pay off second. And the one we pay off last is obviously the property with the third lowest ratio. So the way that looks is the extra $130 we're going to pay every month goes to the credit card. So instead of paying off $300 a month to the credit card, we're now paying off $430 a month to the credit card. And we keep doing that until the credit card is all paid off. Once the credit card has been completely paid off, the extra $430 goes to the car loan. So the car loan goes now, instead of $550, it goes up to $980 every month to service the car loan. Once the car loan has been paid off, the extra $980 goes to the property loan. And so now all of that $1,430 a month goes towards paying off the car loan. So this is how we can use, very simply, a debt management ratio to decide where we want to be paying our extra money to servicing those debts. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on that?
Yeah, just thinking about Yeah, the steps there, and if so the total budget for managing the debts was initially, what was it, $1,300.
Yep.
If you paid off the credit card and then and then you also determined, so you've still got the two other loans, but you've also found a logjam or something. Like, would you think about, do we pay the $980 a month to the car, or do we, put a bit more to the car than some to the logjam? And
Yep. Well, obviously the logjam is going to be, for example, or let's say there's a big weak link that you just become really aware of, you needed to address. They are important things that you need to address. And I'm just going to quote Brian right here. In the end, Clint, this is your choice.
yeah,
Okay. It's going to be a choice for you. Do you want to address your logjam or your weak link?
yeah,
Or do you want to keep paying off those loans? All right. In the end, it's going to be, you don't have to pay, because this is paying, you have to pay the inescapable expense, which is the monthly repayment.
Mhm.
If you have extra money that you want to pay off in addition, that would be your choice to pay it off, to get to pay down your debt, or would you want to put it towards a weak link or a logjam or something else? At the end, it's going to be your choice and where you want to spend your money.
Yeah.
All right. So if that was your situation, Clint, what do you think you would do?
I think I would actually, so say if I had a logjam and I had those other two debts, I'd look at, say whatever the interest rate is on the loan, and then potentially look at the potential income if I address the logjam, like what would the extra income be, and then also look at that sort of ratio. So where's the best bang for the money going to go?
Yeah.
Is it, the logjam might increase sales by a huge amount, and that would just be a no-brainer, or it might only be minor or less than what the debt is anyway. So just then put it to the debt.
Yeah. I mean, in the end, it's going to come down to what you personally choose. I know myself in that sort of a scenario, because this debt, paying off this debt, that's going to be a choice. We've got a bit of extra money, we can pay that. We only have to pay the minimum amounts. That's the inescapable expense. I would choose to pay any additional money to address the logjam or a weak link, because I think that's going to return a bigger bang for buck over time myself. Because if I can address, say, a logjam, and that in turn leads to much more, profitability and income for my overall business, I'll have more money that I can then use to then offset or pay off those debts later. I'd rather spend the money to generate that additional income now, and then as I build more profitability and income, that could then go back into servicing those debts in the next year, for example. Yeah. But in the end, it's going to come down to your choice. That's the whole thing. And that's one of the reasons why we want to get rid of our inescapable expenses as much as possible, because we have to pay them no matter what, and so we don't have the choice. So we want to become as debt-free as possible, as quickly as possible. All right. Any other questions? Okay. So I've gone through everything that I wanted to touch on today. Oh, Glenn's back. Okay, good. All right. So next week, in our final session, I will run through a little bit about land planning, and then how we actually put all these expenses, how we incorporate them into our plan, as we've given you a lot of the information now. So in the next session, how we put it into our plan using all the worksheets and the master sheets and so on and so forth. And then importantly, how we're going to be monitoring our finances over the coming year. All right. So if there's no other questions, I'll hand back to Glenn to take over for the grazing planning.
Thanks, Bernard.
Yep.
Thanks, Bernard.
All right. So let me just stop sharing my screen. All right. So I'll probably just hang around for a couple of minutes, Glenn, then I'll take off at 10 o'clock, my time.
10 o'clock, I think you're a bit late.
Still got 10 minutes, Glenn.
All right. Righto.
There you go. All right.
Move myself around here. What are we doing? Now I've just got to find everybody again. Give me 2 secs. All right. I seem to lose everybody when I put my thing up these days. But anyway, all right. Well, thanks, Bernard. I caught the start and the end of that. Everybody hear me okay? Just going to try and find.
Yeah, you're coming through good.
Okay, excellent. Just give me 2 seconds. I'm just. Oh, there we go. Excellent. Yeah, I can see everybody. Cool. So today we had a big long session last week. So I just wanted to probably make this one fairly short. I'll focus today on more about drought reserves. I think we covered off measuring forage. Can I just get a hand up from those that have done a little bit of forage checks in the last couple of weeks? Yep, Clint has. Yep. Narissa, you've been out collecting stuff?
I have.
You have? Cool. Excellent.
I
All right.
don't. So it was just on the curbside, but
Yeah,
yes.
that's fine. Yeah. And it's a matter of just getting your eye in, I think, is more of it. And once you start running stock, it's then about that monitoring process of saying, okay, I'm going to do an assessment as I go into a paddock. And then I'm estimating what I'm going to be using while I'm grazing, and then do a check when you go out, and then during your growing season, that gets you to say, okay, how close am I, so that when you're actually going out and doing those assessments ready for your non-growing season planning process, you can be a little bit more accurate as you're going forward. So get your practice in. Did anybody get a chance to have a look at the video, the extra video I posted up? No, Clint hasn't. Brian did. All right. So I went through it out in the paddock there. So you can actually see, looking at some grass, looking at recovery, and looking at how much we were able to harvest off a section. And since that video, I also had to mow a campground area, which was in a little paddock in front of our area. And I thought, oh, this would be interesting, because it's a flail mower. It goes down to about 3 or 4 inches, so it's still leaving really, really good ground cover. And so I grabbed the rake and raked it up into some piles to see how much would fill. And I actually calculated in that particular paddock that I was harvesting that it was about 2 square meters of per DSC day, so per animal day for a DSC. And so that's actually giving me about 5,000 DSC days per hectare in that particular paddock. The ability to do that check and actually take the whole lot, which is really what I was doing with that flail mower, I did in that particular paddock, because we had actually grazed it down quite a lot a couple of months ago. And so all of the grass that's actually regrown was actually edible. There was very little, if any, stalky or highly lignified grass or anything else. So if I put especially cattle, but my combination of sheep and cattle in there, they would eat that 5,000 DSC days per hectare. Okay, so that was a fair chunk of feed there. And actually where I actually mowed was a lower area, because I'd previously mowed it in October. So it was actually only around 50 to 60 days of recovery on that particular area. So I was able to grow effectively 5,000 DSC days in that 60 days of recovery on that little block. Okay. So just getting out there, testing it, and then monitoring it as you go through, so that you can see how accurate you are. Okay. So looking at, I thought I'd just put up we talked earlier today with Paul about that rule of succession. I always like to put that up and keep it, at top of mind, because there's especially posts from various agencies and things at the moment, especially in our region, of what weeds are around and what we should be doing and everything else, that we actually keep this rule of succession. Paul was talking about cooler grass. We've had a big burst of Chilean needlegrass in the New England again this year. We've got St. John's wort having a big season as well. All of these are all plants that are coming into the region, into these areas, because the conditions have suited them. Now, it could be a yearly seasonal condition, the right rainfall at the right time with the right germination conditions that have caused it there. It could be that these paddocks, and I was talking with my neighbour who's on a very large operation. We were talking about this, and he said, oh yeah, we've got some St. John's wort. And I said, oh, so what sort of paddock was it in? He said, oh, it's the one across the road which had been really heavily grazed during the dry period last year and the year before. So he was able to identify the reasons that had caused the conditions that allowed that plant to establish. And so then he's got the ability to actually change the management and ensure that it doesn't take over. All right, so this is where our grazing comes in and our monitoring of results. So just bringing that back to your forefront again. But in this one, I want to look at grazing and drought. So the other thing looking here, this is our, as far as grazing is concerned, what the tools are and where we're going to use it. And we'll get into looking at grazing charts and computer spreadsheets and all sorts of things. But I thought I'd put in here things like fencing, water troughs, just to bring those to front, because that's part of our land planning process when we're talking about managing grazing. So how's all that come into drought planning? So when we talked the other day, we're talking about drought reserves, and you've got your forage pasture growth map for your particular area. And then we're looking at when our non-growing or slow growing season was, depending on your environment, and then what our reserve is. So what extra time do we want to plan for in the incidents when we don't get our unicorn normal break of the season? Okay, so invariably it's either going to break early, late, or whatever else. And I showed that variability data from my grazing last time as to how close to seasonal averages people get. And it's, in the last 20 or 30 years, we've hit at about 10 individual little peaks of time through, but most of the times we're either above or below. So we want to look at what's going to happen if that season doesn't break, and how do I plan through from that? So when we're talking about our growing season, this is our forage quantity. So we want to be building up the quantity that we have available through that growing season, so that when we start into that non or slow growing season and change our planning, we've actually got fodder that can take us through amply right through to the end of our reserve, at least. Okay, so what the difference here in keeping a reserve is we have a few different ways of doing this. And what we want to do is reserve in time rather than in a space. So if we look at the normal reserve strategy would be I'm going to keep a paddock aside. I'm going to keep one, and that'll be just in case something happens. So in this case, I've got one here. I've grayed that out, and you can see I've taken out, we've got 10 paddocks here in this example. I've taken one out. So we've kept one away. That leaves us only 9 paddocks remaining to do our planning. So we have to actually plan the rest of our non-growing around the rest of these 9 paddocks. So in doing that, we've added then extra time that we have to be in each of these paddocks. So if we on average, we'd have got to be in every paddock an extra 2 days if we're planning across a 180-day non-growing season, for example. The other thing that happens is if we don't use this paddock, so season breaks. Okay, everything's happy. Stuff happens. We start to get our growth growing at our normal time, and we haven't needed to use that particular paddock. Well, what happens then is we've now got a paddock of grass from 6-7 months ago sitting there, all mature, all dried off, all in that phase 3 of growth. So it's all got seed heads on it, very mature, and its quality has dropped off because it's been standing there for that. It's also tall grass shading out the surface. So we might have young grasses and things trying to get through with a good break in the season, and they're being shaded out by those tall grasses. And there we go into that process of over-rested grasses. Now, in the video I actually showed you an over-rested fescue plant that I had in the paddock, and I had a paddock that was probably not over-rested, but there are plants within that paddock that are over-rested because I haven't had my density right. And that was a fescue plant that was probably about 30 to 40 centimeters across the base, so it's a good size perennial plant. But it was only about the outside 10 centimeters all around that was actually growing. The internal component of it, 20 or 30 centimeter circle in the middle of that, was all dead, right? It had matured to the point where it wasn't being refreshed, and the tillers have all died off. And so I had an over-rested particular grass. So we can have those in those paddocks all the time. In this case, we'd probably start to get a whole paddock of it. Now, if we didn't use that early in the season and we left it till later because we're trying to get productivity on, then those grasses are getting older and more mature as we go. Another strategy is to have a hay reserve, and if you're in southern districts of Australia around the Mediterranean zones, cutting hay every spring is something that people all seem to do. And so looking at that, we can actually harvest it or purchase it if you don't have the ability to cut it. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like, to be able to store 1,000 DSE days in the shed in round bales is around 3 round bales. Okay, so if we've got a property, this is an example where we've got 2,000 DSE running on our property and we need 60 days of reserve, so that's our drought reserve, then we actually need to store 120,000 DSE days in the shed in hay, okay, if we don't keep that in the paddock. So that's equivalent to 350 bales and an average of about $200 a bale. We've got $70,000 worth of cost sitting in the shed just in case. Okay, so there's an opportunity cost on that. So we've got $70,000 tied up. If we actually invested that, say in the share market or something else, in a wealth generating asset, we could generate between $5,000 to $10,000 a year in income. So we've got lost opportunity for having that sitting in the shed just in case if we might need it. So what else would we do with that money? So say for example, we've instead of putting that in, we've actually had that money doing other things, and we actually have a good season. $70,000 would actually be able to buy us about 500 to 600 sheep. We could then put on some weight gain. So if this is where we have a good season, and this is the situation where we are in right now, where we've had a really good season and we're actually in the process of looking at purchasing or putting additional gistment on. So that's $70,000 that we haven't got tied up in that feed. We might have had it available, so we could do this, or we might be able to buy 40 or 50 cows. Again, we've got a return there. So that's looking at a 60 to 90 day sort of return on some good feed. So we've just got opportunities if we're not tying that feed up. So what we want to look at is saying, okay, we want to keep it in space, in time, not space. So we want to keep a reserve in all 10 paddocks. So we've got all 10 paddocks to manage through that season. We're estimating at the start of our non-growing or dry period what the pasture quantity is. We look at our planning period. In this case, I've picked 180 days. Yours might be shorter, it might be longer. We saw those different growth charts last week. A reserve, what's your comfort zone reserve that that either the season's got a very, very high probability of breaking at that time, or it gives you time to do your planning. For us, we look at planning and having that reserve finish about now, about 2 weeks before Christmas. So if I've had to make any critical decisions, of which we've already done some policy planning around prior to this, but I can actually say, right, I'm going to sell because this week, this Thursday is the last cattle sale before and sheep sale before Christmas, before the new year. Otherwise, I've got to wait until mid-January before the next ones come back. So I can make some things and go, right, well, actually, it's really, really dry. I can't afford this. I can make a decision, sell off stock and get those out of the way. And I go into Christmas not having to worry about whether I've got a feed stock or whether something doesn't have water or whatever those are. So I can be more relaxed and comfortable going into that season, have that money coming into the bank, ready for when the opportunity arises and we get rain again and we get growth again. Okay. So if we actually are doing this planning in time, we've got a 180-day planning period. We've got 60-day reserves. So our total air time is 240 days. And so that 60 days actually equates to about a quarter of the feed that we're actually leaving in reserve in all of the paddocks. Okay, so we've got a really good actual cover of grass in all of those paddocks available. So what's the benefits of that? One, we've got more paddocks available through that season to manage nutrition and manage our animals through that season. As I said, we've got a quarter of that feed left across all of those paddocks. So we've got soil covered. We've got good ground cover to be able to take advantage of any rainfall events and things that do come. And when the season does break and if we don't need to use that, we've got that sort of grass in all the paddocks. So we've actually got some mature grass to blend with our new season growth. So you actually get better balanced nutrition as that new season comes away. If we estimate it incorrectly, so we estimate our figures, then that quarter might be a third, might be less than that. Yeah, but we've got some fudge factor in there to be able to do it. But if we're planning on using all of our feed because we've got that paddock in reserve and we've mucked it up, then we could get ourselves into a really severe position at the end of that season. And we've got no wasted feed in one paddock. So we don't have that mature feed sitting in paddock. We've actually utilised it. And we're going to actually put that animal impact and things across that whole of area that we're managing through that part of the season. So just to summarise, so holding reserves in time, can produce extra forage production, because if you are also then managing across that 10 and you've got a slow growing, you can manage your recovery, a slow recovery during that period. But it also gives us that full 10 paddocks to be evenly grazed. And so we've got full 10 paddocks recovering when we come into that next growing season, rather than having, one paddock taken out and having all mature grass that we're having to do some special management on. We've got increased management flexibility. So you've got more paddocks to do more things with. You can split paddocks. You can, as soon as we start removing paddocks out of our regime, then we're losing some of that flexibility. We're losing some of that flexibility. Generally, this is bringing animals through the drought in better conditions. So we're utilising our grass. We can better manage, and we looked last week also whether we can take a single selection through that period or double selections, what our supplementation regime might be. And so if we actually got more of that feed available, it's all in better quality. We actually can bring our animals through drought conditions or that non-growing season in a better condition. By holding in the reserving area, we lose that nutritional value because we've got over-rested grasses. And so we actually get a shift towards forbs and woody species, especially in both brittle and non-brittle environments. So if you're resting country that's actually not being grazed, then especially if you're in, say, a non-brittle tending and coastal type environment, then you'll have some of those woody plants and things coming through. And even in our seasons, our areas where we're more of that brittle tending, you'll get a transition and a reduction in the succession regime back towards forbs and those sorts of things, because our grasses become less healthy. They lose their vigor. We've got lower animal performance because we're managing, we're getting down into more of the lower quality grass in the paddocks we are managing, and we've got a whole paddock that's deteriorating, so that when we come into the new season, we've got lower performance availability off the one we set in reserve. So what sort of decisions do we need to make? And how do we do that? If we're running out of feed and our season doesn't go well, what can we do? We start doing our field checks on animal days. So get around, have a look at what you've got. Do your tally. do your tally of what you've got to manage so that you can, where you're going and what you've got. We don't know what we don't know if we don't manage it. If we don't measure it, we can't manage it. First thing is to combine your herds. So if you've got multiple herds, start putting them together. That gives us more paddocks to be able to have a longer recovery period across our landscape. So we can do that. So that's one of the first ones. So if you've got multiple, combine them in. And I'll show you an example of that in a sec. Increase our paddock numbers through temporary fencing. So again, we've combined, so that gives us long recovery. Splitting our paddocks again gives us the ability to actually extend that recovery period again even further. And destocking sooner rather than later. So making sure when we're doing those two things, combining herds and splitting, that we've done our assessments and we're measuring and monitoring our grass so that we can actually match our stocking rate to what that available capacity is in our paddocks. But making sure that we're actually doing that decision earlier. If you remember, we looked at this last time, that destocking decision. So if we destocked right at the start of this period, based on the forage, so we've assessed we've got 8,000 stock days to last us 200 days, and we've got 70 stock. Actually, that 8,000 stock days will only last for 40 head. So if we destock right at the start, we've got to destock by 30 head. If we delay and we decide, no, I'm going to keep it's all going to do, it's all be right, then we maintain our 70 head, it'll only last us 114 days. Then if we look and say, well, if I'm going to last 50 days, then, or I'm going to, I need to sell some stock off in a month's time. Say we're leaving into Christmas, the next cattle or sheep sale's not until mid to late January. We've got some extra time there. So that means when we actually do come to do it, if I haven't set my critical date around those sale dates, then I'm having to decrease more. And we saw that the longer that we leave that, even those last little small ones, we actually destock quite significantly. So this is just a example of being able to destock early means we actually have to reduce stock less. Okay, so we're able to take ourselves through earlier. So getting those decisions, and that's the thing, setting those critical dates. So that what the drought reserve does for me in my planning is it actually sets me a critical date of making some decisions around measurement of my fodder and making some critical decisions around my stocking rates. Okay, so I'll be looking at leading into that. What's the seasonal conditions look like? Have I had a dry winter? Have I had my annual rate, my rolling rainfall? Is it tracking well or is it actually below? Okay, so when I get to that point of a needing reserve, will I be okay and run it through? Or will I really start to make that critical decision of destocking and making some adjustments? And if you remember, we talked about enterprise mix within your business to allow you to more easily make those decisions without having economic detriments to your business. So having a mix of adjustment stock or trading stock, young stock, you can sell off or getting ready to be able to sell off. So having a mix of those enterprises, they can say, right, well, as soon as I hit this critical date, which might be a month before my drought reserve is due to kick in, if everything's not looking real good because of rainfall, okay, adjustment stock can go. Okay, call up the adjuster. You've got to get them off. You have that built into your contract with your adjuster, and they go. That immediately then extends your available feed further straight away before you've even hit your drought reserve. Then you might hit your drought reserve period, your end of your season, it hasn't broken. Then you're getting into the destocking policy. So do I destock all my cull cows or cull ewes? Do I get rid of the very, very young stock? Do I early wean? There's a whole range of decisions we can do there. Any of those, the earlier we make those, the less big impact they'll have on our business. If we look a little bit longer term, what are the things we can do to help us better manage this over time? So effectively planning for more frequent droughts. And one of those things as far as planning, as I've just mentioned, is creating a policy of what your destocking process will be. So what are your critical dates? Sit down and plan out your calendar and say, okay, well, our season normally breaks here. That's our drought reserve start off. Okay, when am I going to make the decisions around changing my stock numbers? If it hasn't done X number of rain by this period, then this happens. and be prepared to say, right, well, which stock go first? Which enterprises do I adjust? How do I work on that? Okay. So doing that prior, like, before it happens, means that when it does happen, and usually we're pretty, a little bit higher stressed at those times, we've actually can pull the policy out, and that policy is focused on achieving our holistic context. So how do we want our land to look like? How do we want our financial position for our business to look like? How do we want to feel as people? So that when you actually come to enact the policy, it's actually decisions towards that context. And so we can do them without having to bring in that stress of the particular point in time and making trade-offs, which generally what happens is, we make trade-offs and we might say, oh, look, I'll hold them a little bit longer, which might detriment our land. But coming back to our context gives us our focus around what we want that landscape to look like. Over time, we want to make sure we're improving our water cycle. So how are we capturing more land? Are we maintaining 100% ground cover so that every drop of rain is coming in is able to be used? Are we maintaining not just the 100% ground cover, but do we have grasses in that landscape that can capture small water cycle? So dews and fogs and those sorts of things. How do we, improve all those little bits of our water cycle and improve it over time? Can we hold water further higher up in the landscape and make sure that happens? Ground surface and ground cover is the first step, but then we can work down on from that point. Plan our infrastructure for more flexibility. So when we said one of the things we do is we start to combine mobs and split paddocks. So if that's part of our decision process, then we need infrastructure that's actually designed to be able to do that. So planning long-term, how we can have flexible infrastructure so that I can split paddocks really easily and it's not going to take a lot of time is really important. So that includes our water. Where are our troughs located? How do I manage water when it's in a dry season? Can I exclude stock from dams so that I can provide better quality water? Are my trough positioned so that I can actually split paddocks easily? Do I have the ability to add little excess points? Like we have every time I put a join in a pipe, and then when we do land planning with people, I suggest they do this because you're going to put a joiner in anyway. Then put a joiner that you can put a tap on. Okay, because then you've always got the flexibility of adding a trough or doing something later on, adding an offshoot, doing something without any major digging up pipes and finding the points and things like that. How do we structure our paddocks and our fences so that we can easily split them? So we want to, it not be stressful. So looking at paddock widths, designs, so that if you need to split them in half, how can we restructure our fences so that we can easily do that? So this is an example. Hopefully you can see this. I'm going to try and get a better map of this from Tim Wright. So this is Tim Wright's property, Lana, here near Uralla. And I just sort of bring this up because what Tim's done is built flexibility into his fencing system and his water system to allow him to handle climatic changes and droughts and seasonal differences in conditions. So you can see the little markers on that map. Each of those markers is in a paddock and represents one of his mobs of stock that is moving around the property. You can see the texture lines here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different little areas, and he calls those farmlets. So he's divided up his farm into 6 different farmlets, effectively 6 rotations. Each of those rotations has, I think, 20 to 30 paddocks in each rotation. So he can get a good graze and recovery period within each of those. So in a good season, he'll have 6 mobs running around those areas. What happens is as things start to dry off, and one of those will be is agistment. And I think at any time you might have actually more than one mob of agistment on. Say this black marker here is his agistment mob and it dries off, then he might go, right, well, that mob, it goes. And what he does then is combines this farmlet in with 1 or 2 of the neighboring ones. And so what he's done is effectively doubled the recovery time for, say, this red marker mob by adding that in, okay? So he's added in this area into the red marker mob and he's doubled his recovery time. If it continues to get dry, then again, he starts combining, and he'll also combine mobs together. So instead of having multiple ones of his own, he'll put his sheep and cattle in a leader follower and be running them around together. And so by the time, and this happened in 2019, 2020, by the time he got into the point where we destocked, he still had his core merinos, and I'm pretty sure he still had a core breeding of cattle rotating around the whole of the property. So he'd combine all of these 6 farmlets into one rotation, and effectively, I think he had 300 and I think it was nearly 400 days of recovery available across the whole farm because of that management. Okay, now that's taken him, a number of years, 10, 20 years of slowly dividing up and adjusting his paddock structure to allow that to happen. But that just gives him beautiful multiple flexibility. He can still maintain ground cover, landscape function, focusing on those ecosystem processes, at the same time as still being able to maintain his economic viability right through fairly severe droughts when neighbours and other people in the region were completely destocked and we had dust blowing off paddocks, and it was a very severe dry period for us up here. Okay, so this is where that long-term planning comes into your process. And when we talk about wealth generating expenses, then investing in these fences and your water systems becomes wealth generating, because it allows you to have future flexibility to be able to have better productivity and better management of your landscape, and therefore better long-term sustainable returns. The other thing I've got here is it provides for multiple enterprises. So he can easily split up this property to have, or he does split it up, so he can have agistment and they're completely separated from other enterprises. So he doesn't have to combine them together. So if he's got agistment that I've got a bull on and his cattle are also there, he doesn't want the bull, then they can be on completely separate parts of the property. Their own rotations can easily manage those. So this is the other thing. This allows us to have that flexibility of enterprise models as well. Okay, so long-term, plan for droughts, improve our infrastructure for more flexibility, water and fences. All right, I'll pull up there and then we can, I'll just go through this slide. So what we're really doing is final principles. If you remember, we're planning, monitoring and managing. So when we're putting in our grazing plan, we then monitor its implementation. Every time we're moving stock, we're checking stock nutrition and their performance. We're checking landscape function. We're checking our pasture quantities and qualities. And then if we've invariably made a mistake or something changes towards, then we actually put in a change and we adjust that plan, adjust our recovery period, adjust our stocking rates, all those things, start to split paddock, combine mobs, all those things. Remember, we're using the tools of grazing and animal impact. So we're grazing and getting that recovery. So we're refreshing grasses, giving them full recovery, building new roots, building new tillers, improving our density, improving our diversity across the landscape. And we're using animal impact as we go through, keeping our density up, putting feed stations in particular areas to get impact. We might want to break up country. We might want to impact a particular plant, to change the conditions, that rule of succession, changing conditions. This is where animal impact allows us to use those animals to change the conditions to make a move towards a better improvement in those ecosystem processes. We're managing for performance of soil, plants, animals, and the environment. Okay, so how are we improving our mineral cycle and our carbon store? How are we improving the health of our plants? How vigorous are they? How do I maintain their vigor and their growth and their improvement? Make sure we're monitoring our animal performance. Are they getting sufficient quantity? Is their gut feel right? Is their dung score correct? Are they putting a weight at the appropriate growth rates? Have I got the right nutrition for pregnant, lactating, or growing stock? And then overall looking at how that all combines to improve our environment. So doing our annual checks for our biological monitoring. How's my water cycle going? How's my infiltration rate? What's my carbon levels? How much diversity have I got? What's the different species of all the different plants I've got? Have I got insects? Have I got birds? All those sorts of things come into that whole environment planning. managing for that community dynamics, I think this is one of the key things I like to get people to focus on. Two things when they start: ground cover and community dynamics. If you focus on those two and you're maintaining that dynamics in your pasture sward, then you actually start to improve. Remember, all those ecosystem processes interact with each other. So we can't change one without benefiting the others. So if we improve community dynamics, we're going to improve our ability to capture energy, our ability to cycle minerals, and our ability to capture and hold and utilize water more efficiently. And our plan has to fit the people. So your plan will be different to Brian's plan, that's different to my plan, that's different to Paul's. You and your people will be different. Okay, there is no system. There is no, do this, do this, do this. It comes into your planning. And this is where we'll talk about using the charts, because if we try to do this in our head, we create systems that aren't flexible to adjust. The planning charts and the process of the holistic planning process allows us to manage that complexity so that we can manage the people and we can manage our livestock and we can manage the environment and monitor that so that we can have positive change as we go forward. All right. I'm going to go short today because we had a whopping great big session last week. So any questions before we pull up today?
Can you send us a chart, please?
Yes, Paul?
Can you send us the grazing chart so we can?
Yes. Yep. Do you want to get into some planning? You ready to do some planning, Paul?
Well, I got to do something. Gotta make it work.
No, that's right. I'll send that through. Definitely. And I'll send with that the aid memoir. So if you remember, we've got the aid memoir, which is like the step-by-step how-to of doing it. So if you actually follow that through, you don't need me to teach you how to do it. It's all written out there. So we can actually follow that through and do the process of it. Now, when the key part of that creating your chart is coming back to monitoring. Okay, so once you put that in place, is monitoring the outcome. So at the moment, Paul, you'll be the same as me. You're in our growing season. So we're only planning probably, I think I've planned out until end of January at the moment on my chart. Because between now and then, that's sort of my, a recovery period for me at the moment. Rain's continuing to come through for us. And it might be that go through Christmas, it might dry off, it might get really, really wet. I don't know. So I can't plan past that at the moment. What I can do, I've gone out and done my pasture assessments and worked out on both our properties what I'll call it excess feed I have available at the moment, knowing that things will continue to grow at the moment. And I've worked out a conservative value that I can actually, I've got an order out with our livestock purchaser to buy me some cows, and I'm about to call an adjuster today and get some adjustment cattle on. So I'm looking at that over the next sort of 120 to 150 days through this season, because I know I've got feed standing in the paddock right now. Okay, I don't have to grow anymore to be able to do that. I've got stuff. Picking the right class of cattle means I can utilize all the existing older, mature grasses that I've got and haven't been able to really highly utilize right now with the stock and the amounts that I've got. Okay, so we're doing that. So you're planning with it. If you're further south, you'll be really getting into, or have started your non-growing season. You'll be looking at what feed you have available, how long is it going to have to last you, what's my stocking numbers, and start that planning. So you'll be looking at the non-growing aid memoir and planning that through. So I'll send that out. And look, if you get into it and you got questions, give me a call. I'm available. I've got a call in with one of the other guys this evening. He's going to give me a call, so I'm available to help you through that if you want to. So,
just quickly, do you have a
yes.
recommended resource for the growth rates of grasses?
Where are you, Narissa?
Mornington Peninsula. but I've got family in Central Victoria.
Central Vic, yeah. So there is stuff there. I'll find that and send that to. I'll send everybody out the list. There is some pro-graze information, long paddock. There's a few different sources that I've pulled together. So those graphs that we looked at last week, and you can find it in for your area. It gives you the base. Some of them have more information than others. Some have different grass species and pasture types. Some are just general growth charts for the year. The long paddock stuff tends to be a lot of longitudinal information, so it gives you the growth chart over the past 20-30 years, and it's a little bit harder to get the minute stuff, but it also has the data you can download and create your own graphs as well, so you can look at that. But yeah, for Victoria, Central Victoria, definitely. Mornington Peninsula, I suppose you're going to be similar to Gippsland, but a little bit different.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. So, as you go further west and you're down that coast there, the Otways has a huge impact on influencing the rainfall. And then once you go over that into those plains areas, it drops right off very, very quickly. So, but the Gippsland's, it's an interesting little area, that bottom south coast there. So, but I'll send that out as well. So
That'd be great. Thank you.
any other questions? Brian, I'm sure you've got a question.
No, it's too close to Christmas. No, thanks, Glenn. That was fantastic. That was
Too
very
close
good.
to
Thank you.
Yes. Well, we've got one more session to go, and I'll just have a quick flick here, which we're going to get into the actual grazing chart and more about there's a couple of little spreadsheets that I use quite a lot now to help with that process. So one of our past educators, Bruce Ward, who was one of the what do you call him, a foundation member of HM in Australia, is he, Brian? So,
Yeah.
developed a lot of really good resources and tools, and we now have those available. We've done some modifications, and we continue to use that. It helps in doing some of the calculations in the grazing chart. And one of the things I find really handy with it is, especially when I'm doing non-growing season planning, I can do some scenario planning. So what happens if I change my stock numbers? What does that do? And there's some planning parts of that, and it just gives us the ability to do it. I don't know whether Brian's seen this in this last couple, but I print the pages out of the spreadsheet, so I don't have to write it all on my chart. But still transfer that to my chart so I can do my visual planning. And that in conjunction with Maya Grazing as a really good recording tool. I use all three of those as part of that planning process. And I find that gives me some really good information that I can help make some decisions on. So we'll have a look at those next time as well. What else have we got there? I think that's about it. That's where we'll finish up. So for next week as well, please, think about any areas that we've covered in the grazing. If you've got a key, topic or issue or something you want to discuss, email it in. Hopefully, give me 24 hours to email it in, and then we can share that and discuss that as the group. Okay. Because I'm sure we want to get into some of the things that you guys are dealing with and how we might be able to do that. So I had some questions around leader follower. I might actually call on Brian to have a chat about that next week if he's available.
Yeah, should be good. Yeah, no, pleasure.
Because Brian's had probably a bit more experience in actually doing it. I don't do leader follower. I just do flirts. I like them together.
Yeah.
But there's some questions on that. And yeah, any other questions? So is there anything else before we finish off?
SIBO lab.
Sorry, was that Paul?
Good? SIBO lab through MLA.
Yeah, look, SIBO lab. I think it's good to look at it after you've done your pasture checks. if you're not paying for the subscription, then it's in 80-meter incidents. I don't know, Brian, have you seen the SIBO lab data?
Yeah,
Yeah, so I looked at it the other day, and it's very, but what I did is I went on after I'd done some assessments and said, okay, what am I saying and what's it saying? Is there something I need to recheck? Or is it, but I find it actually has improved in the last 6 or 12 months. They really couldn't handle tree cover and various things previously. They've now improved that, and they've just recently made an adjustment with access as well. So if you're a LPA property, so you're using NLS tags and all those sorts of things, you've got to be LPA to be able to do your stock decks and that thing. You can have access to the basic SIBO Labs data. So for those that don't know what it is, it's satellite tracked imagery across Australia, looking at green grass, total grass cover, brown grass, tree cover, various measures in that. And it gives you can do a kilos of dry matter per hectare of different, whether it's the dry grass or the green grass or both. And so when you're doing your pasture assessments of those DSC days or animal days per hectare, you can use it as a comparison to see how accurate you are. But 80-meter squares is pretty big, but I can see differences between us and our neighbours. That's pretty much all I do is say, how am I tracking? Am I going well, or are they doing better than me? And if they're doing better than me, what have I done wrong, and how do I fix it? Okay, so yeah.
Yeah, I think it must be the tree cover that causes my problems.
Yeah.
It always looks better. Well, I think it is. So.
Yeah, well, they can't distinguish it. Their models just can't distinguish the tree cover stuff. It just doesn't work, which is, that's understandable. So that's where getting used to your own measurements and monitoring, recording that, and keeping track over time will give you the surety and more confidence with your own planning. Yeah. All right. Well, we think we'll pull it up there. As I said, any questions, please give us a call. Happy to have a chat. I've got some calls already booked in with a couple of people. So if you want to run through any particular issues more, and before next week, if you've got something you want to discuss or you want to help with, please send it in and we can have something prepared ready for the next session, our final one, before we finish off. The other thing is tomorrow, I'll just check the time. I'm pretty sure it's midday again. Yeah, 12 to 1 tomorrow. I'll be doing a deep dig annual review one, which is more about strategic planning. So looking back at the year we've just done, what's gone well, what could we do better, and then helping with setting some plans for the year going ahead. So if you're available, please register through the co-op. I'm not sure whether Helen's got a registration form up on that one. Go to the co-op website. I'm sure there'll be something there. Or just send an email to myself or Helen, and you'll be able to get access into that to be able to join along. If you aren't able to come, still send in and we can send you out the little templates and pro formas that we'll be sending out for that planning process. Okay, so that'll be tomorrow.
Will there be a recording of that one, Glenn?
Yes, there will be, Paul. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's
I'm sharing tomorrow, so I'll get a recording. Thank you.
Yep, no worries. All right. Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. And we will catch you either tomorrow or next week.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for
everybody.
coming along.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks, Len. Ciao.
See ya.
Thank you.